لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع ذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجر وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة يردن الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كما أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاع إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا ونطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متقيون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قول من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخنا على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويهق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. اللهم صل فاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وظل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحتك الإثم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك، وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك، وأن توزعني شكرك، وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع، أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا، وفي جميع الأحوال متوادئا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته، وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك، وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك، وغلب كحرك وجرت قدرتك، ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد للذنوب غافرا، ولا لقضائه ساترا، ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت، سبحانك وبحمدك. ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي، وسكنت إلى كديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي، كم من قبيح سترت، وكم من فاده من البلاء أقلت، وكم من إثار وقيت، وكم من مكروه دفعت، وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرت. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي، وقصرت بي أعمالي، وقعدت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي، وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها، ونفسي بخيانتها ومطالي. يا سيدي، فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعل وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي، من لي غيرك؟ أسألك كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي، أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تدين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسأده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك، وخالفت بعد أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد عتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شدي وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انتوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك وأتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضئا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارها سعت إلى أوتان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مدئنة ما هكذا الدن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك أنك يا كريم يا رب. يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكار على أهلها، ألا أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمال لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكار فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاء عفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج الآمنين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال الآرفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاك طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج معمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي، فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تعلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يهركه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك. لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتتولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريته، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أدهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواره، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناسيتي، يا عليما بذري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي، يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قوي على خدمتك جواره واشدد على العزيمة جوانه، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرها إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في المبادرين وأشتاك إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جبارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد ومن كادني فكد واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك وعتف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر ذلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم الرأس ماله الرجاء وسلاهه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
رحم الله سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وأن عليا ولي الله عليه الصلاة والسلام حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله استغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه إنه كان الله أكبر أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصلي لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وأن عليا حجة الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير نعما حي على خير نعما قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب. الله أكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سميع الله لمن حمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سميع الله لمن حمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر الحمد لله كما هو أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سميع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد سبحان الله والحمد لله لا إله إلا الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا سبحان الله لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم سميع الله لمن حمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم اللهم ارزقنا شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود وزيارة الحسين إلى يوم القيامة الله أكبر بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليكم الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل الفرج. لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. اللهم صل على No, I'm saying as long as you can.
How's it going? Okay. محمد وآل محمد صلوات. आज की रात तुझे गोदी में सुला लूं मेरे असग़र आजा, लोरी अरमानों से भरपूर सुना लूं मेरे असग़र आजा। आज की रात तुझे गोदी में सुला लूं मेरे असग़र आजा। तीर के आगे मेरे लाल तुझे होना है, देख कर तेरे हंसी दिल में ने भी रोना है। जो तरीके हैं लड़ाई के सिखा लूं मेरे असग़र आजा। और पहले अल्लाह का मैं शुक्र बजा लाऊंगी, देख कर खून तेरा लाल मैं मर जाऊंगी। मैं तुझे मौत की हिचकी से बचा लूं मेरे असग़र आजा। तेरे मासूम सकीना को पिला के पानी कल तेरी प्यास बुझाएगा अली का सानी। मैं तुझे देख के प्यास अपनी बुझा लूं। मेरे असग़र आजा आज की रात तुझे गोदी में सुला लूं। मेरे असग़र आजा। मोहम्मद वाल मोहम्मद सलावत।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Sayyid Hasan, Rizvi, respected elders, dearest brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jamia wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumin listed on the screen as well as all other marhumin. Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha. Dua Shfa Maris is requested for all those in need here and elsewhere, as well as those listed on the screen. Let us recite together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 Ya Allah. The HIC youth will be selling shirts this Muharram. Please see any member of the youth committee to place your order. The deadline to place these pre-orders is on Monday. Before tonight's interactive session, we'll inshallah have a tribute video in honor of Marhum Askar Haji, so please turn your attention to the screens for this video.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for being here today. We just have a few words to share. Papa, you held our hand when we were small. You caught us when we fell. You are our hero. And every time we think of you, our hearts are filled with pride, even though we always miss you, Papa. We know that you are by our side in laughter and in sorrow, in sunshine and in rain. We know that you are watching over us. Until we meet again, inshallah.
Our Papa was diagnosed March 2021 with glioblastoma multiforme brain cancer. At the time, we didn't know at what stage he was, but we later learned that because of how aggressive the cancer was, it was the end stage for him. Glioblastoma multiforme is also known as GBM. GBM affects the brain, which is the main computer of your body. GBM is described as an octopus. The main part of the tumor can be only seen through an MRI scan. But there are parts of the tumor that are like tentacles of an octopus that cannot be visible through the MRI scan. Our Papa was our hero and did everything for us. He was the best Papa in the world. We miss him so much. Our Papa taught us always to be a good person and to not let anyone bring us down. We started donating money to companies that research GBM and hopefully one day can find a cure for this horrible disease that took our Papa sooner than he was supposed to go. We created a fundraiser for brain cancer awareness this year and asked people to donate to the Waves of Grey Foundation. There was a 5K walk in honor of this foundation, and every year it is in May. May is Brain Cancer Awareness Month. We wear gray in May. We hope that we can help find a cure for what our Papa had and help someone not lose their loved one. Our Papa taught us one thing, that life is so unpredictable. One day he was normal doing normal Papa things, and the next he had brain cancer and was gone. We all miss him so much. We don't want anyone to have to ever lose their family members to brain cancer. Even though our Papa lost his battle to GBM, we don't want anyone to have to lose their loved one to it. Please support brain cancer research by seeing the screen for different ways you can donate. Please recite a Surah Fatiha for our Papa and all of Marhumin.
Let's recite one more Surah Al-Fatiha for Marhum Asghar Haji with the Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we want to cover two things today. If you saw the flyer. First thing is we want to just summarize the past few months, the discussion that we've been having on God-centricity versus egocentricity. To see, what were the proofs that were offered, what were the responses, and what is kind of our final conclusion. After that's done, assuming we have enough time, then we'll open up to just general Q&A regarding any topic, whether it's been addressed in these past few months, or if it's something else that you figured makes sense to address in this sort of gathering. Either you can ask the questions from the floor, the mic will be available. We just ask that you speak up so the audio can be picked up online. Otherwise, you can send in your questions through Slido as well. That's available too, as usual. And at any point, as we're going through the summary, if anybody has any questions or comments or objections, feel free to just butt in and stop me right there so that we can open it up, right? Because we want to try to make sure that this topic may come up again, it probably will, but we want to make sure that, at least for those of us who are here in this room, those of us who are listening at home, we have and give ample opportunity to try to answer all the questions that might be available. And as I said, there may have been things that, as I presented it for these past few months, maybe I misrepresented some ideas, so I need to make sure I'm corrected for that. Or if there's any ideas that, let's say, weren't clear, then we have to go through that as well. So we want to try to make sure that we wrap up everything today, inshallah. You can recite one more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So just to summarize again what we meant by God-centricity versus egocentricity. Obviously, every Muslim wants to say that God is at the top of everything, right? So if I'm here at the bottom, I need to make a decision about my life, then, it should be Allah who's telling me what I need to do. So, okay, Allah gives that information in different ways, right? He sends down, prophets. He sends down different sort of books, right? The Quran and other scriptures. And then also we have, our intellect that also is utilized as well. Now, most things will be addressed and be covered and will have a sort of religious ruling for it. Either it's going to be wajib or haram or mustahab or makruh, or Allah says, do whatever you want, it doesn't matter, right? So that's it. So sometimes even our own ideas, our own opinions, they can come in because God has given us the ability to do so. It doesn't really matter what you do, right? Now, what we were saying is that this is pretty much the traditional approach that every Muslim feels like they're following, right? Obviously, for books here, we obviously mean the Quran. Now, the problem is when this gets flipped around, we end up putting our ego meaning our opinions at the top instead. That's what egocentric means. And what ends up happening is that everything that God wants, meaning the Quran, prophets, anything else is all going to be filtered through our own ideas and opinions. So, if the Quran says, again, simple examples, as we mentioned, the Quran says hijab is wajib. The traditional method says, look, God said it's wajib. I may not understand. I can ask questions and I can research whatever, but that's what it says. So, you follow. If Quran says polygamy is allowed, okay, the Quran allows it, so we go ahead. That's the orthodox position. Over here, what we were claiming, the egocentric position is that even if the prophets, the Ahlul Bayt, they've come and said something, even something is written in the Quran, meaning God has literally sent this down, my opinion at the end of the day can change that. Now, obviously, people who follow this approach, they don't call it opinions, right? They're claiming that it's the intellect or the intuition, human intuition. It's like that's what's actually at the top. That's what allows us to say that no, hijab can change from time and place, right? Some societies don't need it anymore, as we went through, a few weeks ago. Or polygamy is something that society has deemed immoral. So we can now change things as we go along. So it's not the Quran or prophets calling the shots at the end of the day. It's our intellect, our human intuition, which we were saying is really your ego or your opinions, saying this stuff does not belong in society. Or another way of framing it is this way, this approach is saying that Islam itself is completely historical. Whereas over here, we're saying that it's ahistorical. Ahistorical is just a fancy word for saying that it's eternal. That when God says something is good or bad, eternally that's correct. Over here, they say no, it's historical, which means that things can change from time and place. So that's the summary of God-centricity and egocentricity. We were saying is that these new sort of liberal, progressive, existential movements that have gained a lot of momentum now in the past few years, their claim is that it's, again, the intellect or intuition which is guiding everything. What we had tried to examine over these past three months is that it's actually it's human-centric. It's egocentric, meaning it's the person saying, I like this or I don't like this. So in a sense, they think God is in the picture, but really we say God is not. And how we show that? Again, we'll summarize. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. So if we're trying to prove something in Islam, if anybody remembers, if we're trying to establish anything as being true or false in terms of Islam, what are the three sources that we use? If you have a question, you want to know whether something's wajib or haram, what is God's understanding? How do we get that understanding? Okay, somebody said Quran, I think, right? Okay, what else? Sunnah, meaning the hadith, whatever, yeah. Sunnah, hadith. And what's the last one? Everybody forgot? It's only been 3 months, come on. Intellect, or aql. Right? So he said, look, if we want to see what is Islam's position, what does God actually say? Is he saying, no, this is what I want you to actually do? I said, okay, if that's what God really wants from us, then somewhere this needs to be there. It needs to be somewhere in the Quran, somewhere in the hadith, or our intellect should guide us to that idea. Right? That's how anything would be proven in Islam. So our question is, okay, let's see if these ideas actually happen. So the first thing we did is we looked in the Quran first. And the argument or the idea that these speakers and scholars, they bring up, they say Allah in the Quran talks about what are these sort of concepts or buzzwords that they believe that Allah uses in the Quran to help us think that we can go and use our intellect and start changing things as we see fit. What were some of those words? Anybody remember? What are the Arabic words for contemplation and pondering and things like that? Oh man, this is not going to be interactive at all, I think. So, tafakkur, right? So this red is dead. So tafakkur, right? First one is tafakkur, which just means contemplation, reflection, pondering, things like that. And there's many other words in the Quran used. Tadabbur, for example, is used. Ta'aqqul, intellection. And the idea was they're saying, look, Allah has put this phrase and these multiple phrases in the Quran everywhere. Why don't you think? Why don't you ponder? Why don't you reflect? So, a claim is that God has put that there so that we know, hey, you need to ponder, reflect, use your intellect, use your intuition, and realize that some things don't apply in society anymore. Right? So that was the claim. We said, okay, if that's the claim, let's go look at nearly every single ayah that mentions the word tafakkur or ta'aqqul or tadabbur. And we looked at, we didn't look at just about everything, but the same sort of themes were there. We said almost every single theme that came out, one of them was just talking about creation. And the reason it was talking about creation was just to prove God exists. That's it. Allah would say, look out in the heavens, in the earth, look at the sky, look at the mountains. Does this seem like it's an accident? No. Do tafakkur, think about this, ponder, reflect. So there's nothing about law or changing anything. It was about the idea of think about creation, look out at the world, and you'll know that definitely there's a creator, there's a God. There's other places too where it was about the need for prophets, where Allah would also say, look, we sent down prophets and we gave them law so that you would obey them. Why don't you think about that? So again, so this part of the prophets being mentioned when it comes to tafakkur was actually the exact opposite of what these progressives claim. They were saying, hey, we're supposed to kind of be our own prophets right now. Whereas in the Quran, when it says do tafakkur, it's to follow the prophet, meaning the last one. Follow him in whatever he's saying. Everything that he says, you need to follow. And there's a few other themes like heaven and hell and death and things like that. The one other one that came was specifically about law. And there's one ayah or one specific or two concepts that Allah specifically mentions, which seems to go directly against the fact that we should be thinking and rationalizing about the reason for why laws are halal or haram. Does anybody remember the two things that Allah was talking about in the Quran? The two things He said, you ask about this and this, you think that there's benefit in it, but the harm is greater than the benefit. What were those two things? Alcohol and gambling. Hasan, yeah. He says, they're asking you, Muhammad, about gambling, about alcohol. And just like us, if we were to rationalize it, we'd say, look, what's wrong with a little drink? Nobody's going to fight. Nobody's going to get upset. Who cares? Or whatever, it's just a bunch of us having a friendly game of poker. Well, nobody's going to get hurt here. God understands that, right? So again, this is us just using our intellect, intuition, and rationalizing it. God says, look, there is benefit in alcohol. God doesn't deny that. He says there's benefit in gambling too. He doesn't deny that. But he said, but the harm outweighs the damage. And this is where at the end of the ayah he says you have to think about that. Now again, he's speaking to the society of Arabs at that time, and even to us right now, where all of us have the exact same idea that, yeah, it's not that bad. What's the big deal? So it's almost as if Allah is directly saying this process is not going to work for you when it comes to law. And I'm giving you two examples. You might think that there is some benefit, the harm is not too much. God's saying, I'm telling you the exact opposite. The harm is more than the good. And then at the end of the ayah, he says, I want you to do tafakkur. I want you to contemplate on that. So then what's pointing there is that, look, you can't figure out everything that's good and bad in this world. You can get some of it, definitely, but you won't be able to figure out what law makes sense and doesn't make sense. It's not going to give you that full aspect. So almost every single thing here, there's only two of them that talked about laws, and all of these ayat all seem to point to the fact that no, your intellect doesn't get involved here. What your intellect should point you to is that you need a prophet to come and give you the law, because your intellect can't figure it out on its own. Otherwise, what would be the point of a prophet? If you and I could sit here and figure out the laws, why would we need the prophets? Now again, they have a response to that, which we'll get to inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now I know some of you are like, you're going fast. Well, yeah, because we spent 3 months on this, so I'm summarizing, right? Anybody have any questions, comments, confusions? Anything? Nothing yet, huh? Ji. So you're asking about the ruling? So the uncle is asking about the ruling for in a country or an area where women are forbidden from wearing hijab legally. So over there, in any situation, right, and this is across the board for just about, every single marja, the principle of harm and enforcement comes into place, right? If ever anybody is in any situation, whether it's hijab or anything otherwise, if it will lead to extreme harm, it'll lead to extreme stress or anything like that, then there's a secondary principle where you don't have to follow it. Even now, so for example, let's think of after when Trump got elected and people claimed that Islamophobia was on the rise and Muslim women were being harassed more than normal. So even there, the law would have applied over here too, in that same regard, where if a woman felt like, look, I'm going to be harassed and I can't handle that, that's unbearable for me, I might be bullied or picked on or somebody might attack me, then she has the right to invoke that principle and say, then for that reason, I'm not observing hijab. So in that case, right? That makes sense? Okay. So that was it for the Quran. So we looked at any points that were talking about law, it said just follow the law. There's no point in the Quran that says use your intellect and come up and things will change with time and place. So there's no hint of that idea anywhere in the Quran. And as we also said too, the proponents of this idea, this sort of progressive, liberal, existential approach, they don't reference the Quran in the first place. They do it kind of just to appease us or to make us kind of confused, but it's not their main source, right? Their main source is the intellect, which inshallah we'll get to in a minute. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, so now we go to the hadith. In the words or the life of the Prophet or any of the members of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, did they say anything that would give us some sort of clue that, hey, when things are going and things are moving along in society, maybe you change places, in the future, you have to be able to think on your feet and know when something is good or bad in that locale that you're in and change the Sharia. Do we have any indication of that? Or another way of looking at it is, were they making any sort of focus on using the intellect and the aql? So what we said is, number one, I'm going to jump over here. Obviously, yes, they praised the aql constantly, right? We remember that in Usul al-Kafi. The first book is the book of aql and jahl. It's the book of the intellect. Even, for example, for the Ahlul Sunnah, the first book in Bukhari, whatever, is wahi, it's revelation. For us as Shias, our first main thing that Shaykh al-Kulaini put is the Kitab al-Aql wal-Jahl. And there's all these narrations talking about the virtue and the benefit of the aql and what it can understand, and it's good and it's bad and definition and all this. I said, okay, see, it seems like that's what they're talking about. But again, we examined and went forward and said, look, what definition did the Ahlul Bayt give of the aql? And every single time, it was basically doing the exact same thing the Quran said. It said, use your aql to look at creation and prove that God exists. Use your aql to go and understand that you need prophets, and also use your aql to understand that there are certain laws that you will never understand. So therefore, you need to rely on a source of revelation, right? The Quran and the prophets. So the aql in that sense was just a pointer to all of these things. That's all it was. But then we said, well, there are some other hadith. And this one was from Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When he was speaking to one of his companions, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, saying that, Hisham, there are two sources that you have that are hujjah, that are proofs and authorities. One of them is an external one. One of them is internal. So the external one is the prophets and the Ahlul Bayt, and the internal one is the aql. So they retort and say, look, we have a hadith that's saying that it's almost like the prophets and the Ahlul Bayt and the intellect are together. They're on the same sort of wavelength here, meaning our intellect is almost like a prophet. It's an inner prophet. The same way the prophet can bring sharia and legislation and law, our intellect can do the same thing. We said, okay, yes, we did take that. The problem is, this part of the narration was of a long 32-part narration where Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam is speaking to Hisham and giving him various different pieces of advice. And when we looked at the real context, what Hisham said before and after, what Imam al-Kadhim was saying right before was, let me bring it up exactly, was that he's saying, Ya Hisham, the only reason Allah sent prophets and messengers to his servants is so that they can use their intellects. Like, okay, for what? So that they can use their intellects regarding Allah. Again, what we already said here before. The best person in terms of answering the calls of the prophets are the people who obey what the prophets have told them and follow their commands. The person who's strongest and most complete in their aql and the highest on the Day of Judgment is the one who's following all these commands as well. So this, again, is not the meaning that they're taking and saying intellect is separate and whatever. No, saying, look, if we're taking it in context, not out of context, it's the exact same thing that's been mentioned in the Quran too, about using your intellect. That, look, I'm not the be-all and end-all. The rational, logical intellect has limits. I can't figure everything out. So I need somebody else sent by God to give me instructions on that. I think that was it in terms of hadith. We looked at a few different ones, but they all pretty much said the same thing. Before we stop and close this part of it, any questions or comments? Or objections or anything? Okay. If not, then let's move on to the last one, which was their main idea. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Let's see. Okay. So the last one was, no, lime green is a little too bright, I think, right? Let's go with something darker. Okay. Yeah. We said, look, this approach, the progressive liberal existential approach, their main source is the intellect and aql. They said, look, you're not going to find our ideas in the Quran, really. You're not going to even find it in the hadith. Why? Because they said, hey, remember what we told you here? Everything's historical. So the Arabs couldn't understand these things. God was speaking to them in their own language. The prophets and imams were speaking to people of inferior intellects and inferior moral compasses. So they couldn't understand these things. We have progressed over time. Our intellects are more perfect, have evolved, have progressed, so we can understand this stuff. And as time goes forward, we will evolve and progress existentially more and more, so we'll be able to understand ourselves what is right and wrong. So that's why they say that's the proof. It's the intellect that tells us that things change with time and place. So we don't need to rely on the Quran and Sunnah and Hadith. It's nice, we'll use it from time to time, but the main source, again, is going to be the intellect, the intuition, and the aql. So, from there, we said that there was three main premises that they had, right? Number one, I can get rid of that, okay. That the aql is independent. It's an independent source. I'm just going to put IND, yeah. Now, what do we mean by that? If you remember, we said, look, a lot of us, if we open the Quran or the Hadith, we may have thought that, hey, we can't put our intellects there. Whatever God's saying, we just take at face value. And we know that certain other schools of thought, right, amongst the Ahlul Sunnah, theologically, that's what they believe, that you can never use your intellect at all. So when God says, I have a face, when God says, I have a body, I have a hand, that I come down from my throne, and this and that, so you have to take that literally. Maybe we don't understand what it means, but no, it means God has a face, He has hands, and has a body, etc. Other groups of Sunnis and Shias say, no, that's not the case. The intellect can give us guidance when we're approaching some of these ayat and hadith. So when God says, I have a face, or I have a body, or etc., we say, no, this is metaphorical or allegorical, or it's talking about something else. It's not literal. And how do we know that? Well, again, our intellect independently says that, okay, I believe in God, and God is immaterial. God is infinite. God is perfect. So how can an infinitely perfect, immaterial thing have a body, have a face? That doesn't make any sense. That's irrational. It's illogical. So then we know, therefore, when we look at the Quran, that any sort of explanation that's physical about God, there's something else behind that. Right? Or we gave another simple example, which doesn't exist, but let's just say we ever found a narration that said, one of the imams says that, in the 2 plus 2 is 5, something like that. Immediately we say, look, either this is a fake hadith, whatever, or there's some other meaning behind it, or it's been mistranslated. Because we know 2 plus 2 is 4, and there is no changing that. The aql, as an independent source of truth, can tell us that. Now we said, here's the caveat though. What does it actually mean for something to be rational? And if you remember, we made a distinction that there's one thing that is being rational, being logical, and that's a philosophical meaning, right? According to Aristotelian logic, right? When you have, if A is B and B is C, then what does the intellect tell you right away? A is C, right? So if you can establish both of these things, this automatically follows, right? That's the stuff they teach you in basic logic. If you can prove this, and there's no doubt, this must follow. That's the way it works. When people are giving arguments in terms of hijab and the reasons for hijab, or the reasons why, again, polygamy was allowed then, or the reasons for slavery, and when people are taking this approach, they're not applying this sort of foolproof philosophical logic. They were doing something else, which we said is not rationalization, it's justification. And that's a whole different thing. And we gave an example when it came to COVID. Does anybody remember? No. So if somebody here coughs right now, I'm justified in believing that they might have COVID. It's possible, right? Coughing, sneezing, whatever. And they might have COVID. Now, is that foolproof rational? No. If they go and take a test and it comes out positive, does that also 100% mean that they have COVID? No, it could be false positive, right? And depending on degree of error between types of tests they take, whatever. So even scientific testing, examining variables, all this, we're always going to be limited. You can try to justify these things, but that's different than proving 2 + 2 is 4, or that God doesn't have a body, right? These are all completely different ideas. So when they claim, for example, that typical example is hijab. We went through this if you remember. Hijab, they said the reason for hijab was because women at that time, they were being harassed. So God wanted to make a distinction for them so that men would not harass them when they came out of the masjid. So, but now, in our society, not observing hijab is not a reason for people to come and harass you, to harass women. So they say, since the reason's not here, then therefore hijab doesn't mean anything. And it's justified, right? If somebody does claim, and you believe that, the actual reason for hijab is to protect women, and that's the only reason, from male harassment. If that's the only reason, and you say, look, right now, in this society, that does not exist, then they might be justified in saying that. We said, but look, here's the problem. That's not the reason. That's not the reason that's been given by the Ahlul Bayt. Or, even if we use our reasons and we examine the justification, it's not foolproof, because we said, look, if that were the case, then what would happen, and what would you say to a woman who's offering her salah by herself? A woman who's offering salah by herself, does she have to observe hijab? Or no? She does, right? She has to cover herself up, with slight differences of opinion about feet, but everything, in terms of the rest of the body, it has to be covered. So look, if hijab was just about male advances and harassment, then why does a woman have to dress in this way, covered up in front of God? So that justification doesn't hold water, right? It breaks down there. So again, that only works for some cases, but not every case. So you can maybe give possible reasons, or maybe this is a reason why, but you can never say that that's 100% the reason, therefore we can change it in society now. Because again, no matter what we say, whether it's alcohol or hijab or polygamy or slavery, any of these ideas, we say, look, you can bring any scientific evidence you want, you can bring any of these historical justifications, but at the end of the day, you'll never be able to understand the effect that it has on your soul. Because the spiritual realm is pretty much off limits. I don't know what effect certain types of food might have on my soul, whether positive or negative. I don't know if, let's say, talking during the adhan, there's no scientific evidence out there that says it's bad for you, but we do have narrations that say, talking during adhan reduces your risk, which happens to be a problem in this community, unfortunately. Right? You shouldn't be talking during adhan, you should be lining up and getting ready for salah, right? So these things are not measurable. They're not empirically verifiable like that. And remember, the perfection of us mainly is about the soul, but yes, it comes down to society and the body and things like that too. Okay? So we said, look, the aql is an independent source, but don't just justify based on a few variables and think you've fully understood the reason for certain laws. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I'm going to pause. Any questions, comments? No. Okay. I'm going to keep going then. So we had two other ideas here. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I'm going to skip some of this summary, right? Okay. The next thing that we talked about, that's a part of their idea, is human moral evolution, or I'll just call it human evolution and progress. So their claim is also that, hey, not only is the intellect independent, but it's getting stronger and better and more perfect and evolving as time goes forward. So that's why we're able to understand things now that they couldn't figure out back then. We know slavery is bad and polygamy is bad and fighting tribal wars is bad, but they didn't back then. And they say the reason why is because humans are evolving and they're constantly in progress. We said, look, what does that mean? We said, are you talking about technology? Well, technology does not tell us that we're morally better than anybody. In fact, we tried to make the case the otherwise. We said with the technological progress of mankind, guns were invented, atom bombs were invented, right? I think I just saw the trailer today for Christopher Nolan's new movie, Oppenheimer, right? Scary, right? That this is what science does, is that it can lead to this stuff. Now you have, we would say that war is probably more moral back in the day than it is right now. Because back then, we're getting into Karbala right now, right? We're upon those nights. At least some of them, they would come out and face each other one-on-one in, chivalrous, honorable combat. Now you have people sitting in, an AC building with a little joystick, going and dropping bombs on villages and things like that. So that's not moral progress at all, right? So that can't be our definition. We also talked about the idea of even simple technology like smartphones and things like that. That doesn't morally progress us at all. Just spend 5 minutes on any social media platform and you'll see what exactly has happened to humankind. That we're done. It's over, right? And it's not just youth. I've seen the uncles and aunties posts. Your posts are terrible too, right? It's really bad. But it sucks us up, and even our attention span has gone down too, right? I mentioned it when we first addressed this topic, that a lot of people are saying, Hasan, you take too much time on Thursdays, our attention span can't handle that. Well, that's not a good thing, right? Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Yes, he is a different character altogether. But back then, people could give hours and hours of speech, and people would memorize it too. They would hear every word. But nowadays, if a video is longer than 2-3 minutes, you're I'm done. I can't handle this. TLDR basically, right? This is not going to work out. So we haven't evolved in that sense either. But we said, look, they don't really care about the technology. Their idea is intellectually, morally, have we gotten better or not? We said, okay, how do we prove if human beings have gotten morally superior or not? How can you show that somewhere? We said in the Quran, in the hadith, there's nothing really that says that humans will get better at the end of the time. We don't really have that. The closest thing that we found was that there are some narrations which say that closer to the time of the 12th Imam, that when he makes his appearance, that Allah will put his hand on the hand of the mu'mineen or the Shias, different narrations, and he will perfect their intellects. So is that a proof? We said no, because it's not telling us the nature or status of the intellects right before the Imam comes. It doesn't say, is it the majority? Is it the minority? Is it 50-50? Is it only people in Orlando? The narration doesn't tell us. And to some degree, it just says mu'mineen, believers. And we also know, أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. The Quran is saying that most people don't believe in the first place. So iman is always going to be in the minority. So to say that humans, as a society, as individuals, are progressing and evolving, that's not evidence that we're really seeing there. They might respond, they say, look, what about other faiths? Don't focus just on a narrow Shia view of history. I said, okay, fine, look at other faiths. So what we did, I think 2-3 weeks back, we said, look, if these truths are intuitive, they're rational to everybody, we can all understand it, then every other faith should have picked up on this too. Especially because these groups are big into religious pluralism and everything, right? They're like, yeah, we're all after the same God, same idea, let's come together and hold hands and pray to God, whatever, that stuff. Okay, cool. Just know that if you want to pray to the same God as the Christians, and the same God as the Jews, and the same God as the Hindus, every single one of those faiths and religions and their ideologies in terms of their eschatology, in terms of the end of times, in all their books it says, as time progresses, right before the Messiah comes back, is going to be the worst time possible. People will be sinning. The world will be filled with oppression and darkness. I said, okay, so if we're all on the same page, as people claim, which we kind of are, well then, it doesn't say we're evolving. Christians don't believe that. Jews don't believe that. Hindus don't believe that, right? We went in depth a few weeks back talking about the Kali Yuga, the darkest phase possible, where Kali, this god of war and darkness, is the one who's, lowercase g, obviously, sorry, I don't mean to be blasphemous here. She's the one, or he's the one reigning supreme right now in this worst stage of humanity and the worst cycle of humanity possible. After this is when we finally get better. So he said, okay, we're not finding this anywhere else then. And in fact, the only people, the only ideologies that believe that humans are getting better seem to be focused on where there's technology, where there's GDP growth, where there happens to be, stock market exchange. Why would they say things like that? Why does it happen to be normally atheistic, people who are more empirical minded, and thinking that they don't need God anymore? It's a very weird coincidence, right? Wouldn't you say, for these speakers and scholars who believe in this, to say we have the same exact ideology as people who reject God and reject religion altogether. Because for people like that, who are atheists, the only thing left, because there is no God in the picture, there's no books, there's no prophets, the only thing you have is me. It's just me as a human figuring out what is right and wrong. So for a Muslim, or any person of any faith to come and say, yes, human beings are the end-all be-all, like, well, you're taking out of the playbook of somebody else, and guess what? They're not on the same, they're not playing the same game as us. It's a different game altogether. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Let's see if there's anything else. The last type of proof that they offer, and this is where we'll end the summary, is where they say, look, all you need to do, just like the Quran says, is look out at the world and you see evolution taking place. Right? You see stars evolving, getting brighter. You see, an apple seed turning into this beautiful tree and then giving us fruit to eat. A human being starts from nothing, from dirt, from dust, or from water. These organisms evolve, and look how complex and beautiful evolved creatures we've become. So, okay, partially that's fine. We said that you're messing with some of the examples. The examples of stars, for example, well, there are stars that fluctuate in their luminosity. There are also stars that end up turning into black holes and sucking everything into existence into them. So that's not the best example to use if you're trying to say we're progressing. Because if we're progressing, that means we should turn into black holes and suck everything good out of life, right? Or the idea of an apple seed. Yes, it turns into an apple, sure. But then, if left alone, what does it do? It rots. A human being. Yes, human beings do grow and at some point become strong and their intellects evolve, sure. But then the intellect's cognitive ability goes down. And the famous sort of idea in our narrations is that after 40, you're pretty much cemented. You're stuck the way you are. Sorry, 40 plus. I'm almost there too, by the way. So yeah, we say, look, there's no evolution in a sense after that. Allah's given us approximately 40 years. I mean, you get, obviously, baligh to 40 years, right, in that sense. That's when you get to build yourself up and train your soul, and then you're kind of stuck with that momentum from 40 plus. Not like you're continually evolving forever. So he said, look, the examples that are being used here, if you look out in the world, no, things go up and they come down. In gravity's simplest example, it goes up and then it comes down. Stars explode. Stars actually, most of them lose their brightness over time. They don't get brighter. And some of them turn into black holes and they suck everything else around them. So the life cycle of other things, and they rot and deteriorate. Things get destroyed. Human beings are the same thing. We start at small, we grow, and then we deteriorate and we die and we pass on too. So there, even in the world, when you try to look for examples, you see that yes, some things can grow and get better, but you can also deteriorate and lose yourself as well too. So there's no hard and fast rule in the world that everything is going and getting better and stronger and more perfect, morally, intellectually, existentially, whatever. There's nothing like that. And we said that the way that they approach this is by using the famous philosopher Mullah Sadra, his idea known as harakat al-jawhariyah, which is transubstantial motion. And I said I'm not going to bring that up because it requires a discussion on philosophy. But suffice it to say that there is no other person, whether an Orientalist academic, like non-Muslim, or any Muslim scholar from Mullah Sadra onwards, who believes in this idea, who has ever applied it in this sense, meaning that humans are constantly evolving in their being and existence, and that automatically makes it so that we can change Sharia as time evolves. There's nothing like that. So this is some individuals their own kind of new idea, which we said, okay, let's see if it stands up to scrutiny. And we looked, we said, look, in the Quran, nothing there. In the hadith, nothing there. And when we apply our actual intellects here, all the ideas as the intellect being independent, we said, yeah, it's independent, but not in the way that you're justifying things. The second thing is that, no, humans are not evolving. So if humans are not evolving, then that kind of tossed out their final point. And the final point was that if that's the case, then they automatically believe Islam, or Islamic law, is also evolving too, because it's our creation, basically. So we said, none of these, this is partially true, sure. But we said, that's what you're doing. You're not actually using rational principles. Human beings are not automatically, morally, or intellectually evolving. And therefore, this one also doesn't apply. So, summary of everything then, is when we examine it by any means, there isn't any strong evidence to support this idea where the intellect or intuition can go in different places in different times and start to change things as they go on. So there's the summary. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. Question. Nobody objected to anything. Okay. Are you going to object? Yeah. We use the mic or no? Can you use the mic? Is that okay? Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think it's interesting that people often equate intellect with morality. Like, the smarter you are, the more moral you are, right? And that's always interesting to me because when you look at the world around us, look at evolution or look at different life forms on this planet, it's often the case that the quote-unquote smartest of them are the most predatory. So you look at killer whales or human beings or wolves, right? They're technically smarter than a lot of their fellow beings on this planet, right? But they're also the most violent and most predatory in many ways. I just think it's interesting how many people have equated the aql with morality or lack thereof. So.
No, that's a wonderful point. Thank you for adding that. Yeah, that's true. That's the problem is the two end up getting mixed together, right? The intellect just perceives morality like that. And it's funny because even in terms of academic studies, when they look at, let's say, these quote-unquote academic intellectuals in philosophy departments, the ones who understand, deontological theory or consequentialist theory, all this fancy philosophical, moral philosophy stuff. The evidence, at least in terms of, again, I'm just going by what academia says, is that they end up being the least moral people possible. Is that somebody who has this backward faith, they end up being more charitable, there's more camaraderie, more brotherhood, things like that. Whereas people who study this stuff for a living and are the quote-unquote intellectuals and elites, right, in the universities, they're the ones who don't do this stuff. Because most of them, if you see now, they end up, because look, when at the end of the day, if you think your intellect or your intuition is, that's it, because for these people, there's no God in the picture, there's no books, there's no prophets. You are the prophet, right? This is what postmodernism is. You figure out everything, what's true and false. And that's why nowadays people say, look, I can identify and say and do anything I want because there's no truth anymore. I can figure it out whatever I want and say whatever I want to do. And that's what now we've come to. They tried this method and it didn't work out, right? The philosophers and the Enlightenment, they tried this and then it failed. That's why now the strongest philosophy in the academic world, or now that's being pushed in the world, is this idea of postmodernism. That there is no truth, there is no morality, you make up everything as you go along. Basically Joker, right? I'm putting it that way, yeah. Let's be a nihilist. Oh, there's questions on Slido. Let me get to those, sorry. First one I think was from today. It says, do you like chicken? Yes, I do. Okay, thanks. Second, most of our reasoning to any Islamic law, e.g. hijab, is justification as opposed to rationalization. However, as laymen, where can we find the correct group of answers to questions that we face today, which are not just justifications, but rather correct rational thought? That's a very good question. So that's going to depend on the actual issue that we're discussing. So for example, right, we had a session a few weeks back when we were talking about abortion. Now, is there going to be a foolproof, A, B, B, C, A, C sort of rational idea of Islam's idea about abortion? Not exactly. But over there, you can offer justification based on the way that we think about life and even the way that other people think about life. So, just to remind those of you who weren't there and to inform you. So, if, for example, somebody else says, we are pro-abortion, pro-choice. Why? Because my body, my choice. I said, okay, if that's what you believe, that every single person has the right to their own body, their choice, they can make any decision they want, it's all a medical decision, then would you also legalize suicide for any reason possible? And you see a lot of people start to break down there. You say, no, because that they shouldn't be doing that. I said, okay, well, why? If you say it's about my body, my choice, then you should be able to take it all the way and say that anything they want to do, it's not hurting you, they're not hurting you. Let them do whatever they want. If they want to commit suicide, let them do it. But usually people will have an issue there. Or when it comes to the idea of LGBTQ and all of that, you say, look, if your idea is that as long as two people are in love and they have feelings, they can involve themselves in any relationship they want. It's like, okay, well, what if they're family members? Right? Because still, in most states, cousin marriages, first cousins are outlawed. It's like, why is that? If it's just about love between two people, you shouldn't outlaw that. Or, right, when you go further into the more grotesque forms of incest, you shouldn't be thinking that that's immoral either. But again, their approach to these ideas is not fully thought out. So you can rationally say, hey, if you believe in this, then this should be your conclusion too. You should also understand this. And normally that's when they'll say, you know what, maybe I should rethink this, because it actually doesn't work out like that. And that might make them rethink some of their choices or ideas. Now for us, the issues that we're facing today, that's why we had this session on abortion specifically, but any of these issues that we're facing, we need to be able to hear it from all sides. So this session that we had, right, the HIC youth had organized, we made sure everybody, had the ability to speak, to give their ideas, why they believe in, pro-life or pro-choice or some mix of both or what their idea was. Everybody heard each other's arguments, and then we started to pick each side apart, right? Both the quote-unquote Islamic side and then the other sides too. So we said, let's hear out, what actually is there. So when we open that up, again, it's not a 20, 30-minute Thursday night discussion, but an actual dialogue and a conversation, then we can open up a lot of these ideas. And it's my firm belief, because I've, through my various researches and travels and things like that, most of these modern day ideas can easily be refuted. Meaning anything that people push in the West in terms of what they think is good or what is good for humans, whatever it is, most of that, if you sit down and break apart the ideas piece by piece, you'll see that it's actually very, very weak. But as we also mentioned a few months back, not everybody can do something like that. Right? In the same way a lot of people get fooled by, let's say, flat earther, YouTube videos and stuff like that, or let's say anti-mask, anti-vax videos. Just because you have a brain doesn't mean you know how to use it, right? All right, that's the problem with this idea here. Just because we all have an aql, an intellect and intuition, doesn't mean we're all good at it. We don't know how to use it in the way that it should be used. Or we know the bare minimum. For example, all of us know how to breathe by default. But if I say, look, what is the correct method for breathing if you're a marathon runner? You don't just know that through your intellect. No, you'd actually have to have studied this stuff to know what is the proper way to breathe, right? Are the inhales more than the exhales? Should I go in through the nose, out through the mouth? What exactly is it? Or something that a man will never understand is, well, how does a woman breathe when she's pregnant, right? When she's having contractions, that's a different method. When you're swimming, there's a breathing method there. So when you get specialized, just us being a human or having something doesn't automatically make us an expert. Now, there's some parents all the time too. Like, I have kids, so automatically I know how to parent them. Like, no, just because you have it doesn't mean you know what you're doing with it, right? Parenting, tarbiyah, needs to be studied from an Islamic perspective. Or teaching needs to be studied from an Islamic perspective, right? Whatever it is. So these things all require more expert discussion. And inshallah, hopefully, throughout the rest of this year and as we go forward, whatever ideas you have of specific topics, we can go and we can start organizing sessions specifically for these ideas. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, somebody's asking, what is the main concept? So I don't understand what the question's about, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I don't understand what that means, main concept. So the rest of the questions are just random ones. Somebody just laughing. Somebody's asking me, what's my opinion on violent video games? For example, Call of Duty or Fortnite. Fortnite I never really liked. Call of Duty I played. Will they have an effect on your soul and your mind? Yeah. But there's positives and negatives, right? Some studies show some of these games can help and improve hand-eye coordination. But do they have a bad effect on the soul? Well, some of these games which are promoting certain ideas, which are promoting sin, right? You're actually controlling a character that's sinning. That's going to have an effect on your soul too, right? And there's legal ramifications, but I'll leave that outside. But in general, I wish I had more time for games. That's it. And then somebody else said Messi or Ronaldo. Neither. I don't care. I don't watch soccer. Okay. Anybody else, any questions from the floor? Any comments? Or, again, anybody else who thinks that we haven't addressed something properly? Yeah, sorry. If you pass the mic. Thanks.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
So many times, like with what you were saying with these rational ideas, or like rational ways of explaining certain things to other people with the modern society and everything like that, a lot of the times when you try to explain these like rationally to a person, you know, why we believe certain things and why we don't believe what they believe, especially in the modern society, they don't believe it's rational, or they don't think it as in makes sense at all. They don't think it's rational. So how can you, in a way, kind of go at that when someone, for example, I'm talking to them and they're like, no, that doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
or no, that's not rational at all. How can you prove to them like this is rational, or this is how you should, like, you know, the reason why I think certain things?
Yeah. So if you're in that situation where you want to have a friendly dialogue, I'm assuming it's friendly, right, and discuss some of these ideas, at the onset, you have to, again, first realize that most people don't have a background in this stuff. So they're not going to understand what is rational, what is irrational. Most people don't know a good argument and a bad argument. They won't know. When you're trained for this stuff, or some people have this kind of, like, I guess an art, right? They're just good at it naturally. Then you can pick apart things very, very quickly and very easily. Most people, though, do need some sort of training. And this, again, like we said, goes for anything. So when these conversations happen, normally what happens is, especially people who are either orthodox or liberal, it doesn't really matter, but everybody goes into preaching mode. They're just going to start shouting ideas or saying stuff. And you can't preach this stuff. You have to teach this stuff. That's the thing. And again, preaching itself is something that has to be learned, and it itself is an art too, but teaching, I would say even more so than preaching, requires that. So, for example, most teachers, and those who do teach you would understand, you can sit there and just monologue for an hour. How much stuff's going to get across? Not much. Even if you do it for 30, 20, 15 minutes, most of the information is not going to work. But if you employ techniques like Socratic method or Socratic dialogue, right, where more than actually saying statements, you're asking questions. That's when you're encouraging the individual you're speaking with to actually think about their ideas. And in at least Western psychology, they say that the majority of people, when you actually push them on, you ask them to explain their idea, they're unable to do so because they haven't thought it through enough. If you actually ask, let's say, we've never talked about this, I think, on the minbar, but obviously there's a lot of Muslims who are pro-gun and a lot of Muslims who are anti-gun. If you sit down and ask somebody for their reasoning, try to get Islamic reasoning or rational reasoning, whatever, why, they're not really going to say much. Even if you look at the discourse of non-Muslims outside about pro, anti, all this, the reasoning is not very foolproof, right? They'll talk about, well, we got to ban assault rifles. Like, okay, what is an assault rifle? I'm sure if you've seen those videos. People don't know how to define it. They don't know that, it's pretty much already banned anyway, but whatever. So you ask a Muslim, say, okay, well, what is the Islamic position? Peace. Islam's peace, right? Like, yeah, Islam's peace, but we also have recommendations that, people should be trained in the weapons of their time, right? This is a fatwa. So how do you reconcile those two, right? So the art of questioning, and that only happens when the person has a sincere intention of trying, I want to gain more information from you. Maybe there's a side of this discussion that I haven't heard before. So why don't you share that with me, right? Like, okay, I've never, talked to somebody about this perspective. You explain to me, why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you. Okay, kind of going more in that line. Sometimes that works, where somebody starts to think a bit more about their idea. And even from, again, a psychological perspective, when a person sees that, hey, they're interested in understanding what I'm thinking about, what I have to say, they're much more likely to listen to you when you do, finally, after a while, finally want to say something at the end. Like, you know what? Okay, you mentioned this stuff about the harm that guns can do and gun violence and all these mass shootings that are happening, and these are terrible things. And I agree with you, something needs to be done about that. Where I think that maybe we need to open up the conversation is, well, how do we talk about a person wanting to defend themselves? And what does Islam say about a person defending themselves? And then you can kind of bridge into the conversation like that. That's a lot different than saying, you don't know what you're talking about, Imam Ali had Dhul fiqar, and what's wrong with you, or something like that. Make sense? No? Okay. I don't know if there was a question or somebody telling me to stop. I couldn't tell. Something was happening back there. The rest of these are all fiqhi issues. So I think, I'm going to end here. I'll end here, inshallah. I was hoping that people would bring some objections or ideas that we didn't discuss for these again, the progressive or liberal idea. I didn't get any on Slido, and we had nothing from the floor. The whole point, again, was that we wanted to make sure, because people had claimed that I was misrepresenting the views. I said, okay, then you have to explain to me where I misrepresented. And I even spoke in person with some of these people, and they said, well, I'll do it later. Like, okay, well, when is it going to be later? Like, I need to know so that I can correct. If I'm wrong, I need to know I can correct myself. If this is the correct idea, if we're supposed to change with time and place, I want to know that so that I can change what I'm doing. If I've been doing the wrong thing, then, I want to change. I want to follow the truth wherever it goes. But the saying that we have in the Hawza, that we've all been taught as students, is that نَحْنُ أَبْنَاءُ الدَّلِيلِ نَمِيلُ حَيْثُ يَمِيلُ. That we are literally the children of proofs. We go wherever it goes. We follow it wherever it goes. So I don't care if you're Orthodox, you're liberal, you're progressive, whatever it is. I don't care your category. If you can give me evidence for something, then I'll go ahead and follow it. Right? That's it. And that's what we're all trying to do, is just to get to the truth. So hopefully in these past few months, we've gone through enough. Again, there's a lot of stuff we did leave out, but I think we went through the main points to show that no matter which way you look at these ideas, there's no evidence to support it. And this is why these ideas have been around for hundreds of years. These people who are coming up now, it's only happening right now in the English-speaking world. This has been around in the Hausa, in the Arab world, in the Iranian world. People have had these ideas before. But what happens is in the Hausa, where debate is meant to happen, people present their ideas, and the ulama, the scholars, debate it. And they do the same thing that we just pretty much did, but obviously much more intensely. So let's look in the Quran. The verses you use don't apply there. The hadith you're talking about, you're taking out of context. And the intellectual principles you're using are not used like that. And they debated, and that's why you see the majority of scholars don't have that idea anymore. Or they never had the idea. It came out with a few people, they presented it, and it was discounted. Same way we had this, you have various movements like that in Islamic history. We have the Usulis and Akhbaris for people who know that. They came out, they debated, and the Usuli school of thought, which is the main school of thought that we all follow, they're the ones that are dominant right now. And things like this will actually change. So if you actually want to say that Islam evolves, it does. But this happens in debate in the right place. It happens in the Hawza. It doesn't happen by somebody jumping on the minbar and using some fancy terminology and trying to mess with people's heads when they don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. So I feel like, again, the method is a little disingenuous to kind of do that. But I understand the reason for why some speakers want to do that. Because they do believe that this method is the truth. Okay, they sincerely believe that. I won't doubt that. I just feel that, look, not everybody who goes to the Hawza, not everybody who studies, not everybody who speaks knows what they're talking about. That's it. Just like not every doctor is a good doctor. Not every mechanic is a good mechanic. That's the way that the world works. Just because somebody has a turban, whether black or white, or they're a speaker, whatever it is, and they can quote some terms and books and scholars, whatever it is, doesn't automatically mean that those things have strength and value. So if you do come across these ideas, no problem. You can come, we can sit, we can discuss, we can open it up. But just never be afraid of these ideas in the sense that, this is going to destroy us and it's going to mess with everything. This has happened in Islamic history over and over and over again. It's handled among the ulama. And then we get articles and books that we can use later on. Obviously, we don't have that stuff translated in English. That's why, because that stuff never was really available, I figured, let's try to do something every Thursday to at least give us some, I don't want to say the word ammunition because I don't want to come off violent and aggressive, but you know what I mean, right? Intellectual ammunition, we'll put it that way. And now, if you do come across, because I'm sure the people who are supporters, I don't know how many of them have, paid attention on Thursday nights or have listened to these things. Some of them, I was told after the first session, they said, I'm not going to listen again. Fine, that's their choice. So those of you who have friends or family members who have these ideas, you say, look, I went through these Thursday night sessions. This is the ideas that were there. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Do you think that there was something that wasn't addressed? Do you think that there was some objection that we could have raised? Is there anything left over? And if there is, then you can come, we can sit down, we can discuss it. Right? That's the thing. We always want to keep that floor open for discussion, inshallah. And that's the real sign of somebody who's intellectual, especially if they're humble as well. Okay, before we end, I just want to pray that, inshallah, since we are upon the month of Muharram, that everyone's aza and their a'mal in these next few months are accepted, inshallah, that our hearts are opened up for the love of Abu Abdullah Hussein, for his family and the shuhada of Karbala, and that when we're looking at Imam Hussein and his mission and the movement, that in addition to the cultural devices that we use to help the emotional connection, that strengthens the intellectual connection as well, that we keep in mind some of the modern day issues we're dealing with. So we can see, as I'm grieving, as I'm expressing that sorrow, as I'm giving pursa to Bibi Fatima alayhi salam, I'm trying to say and make sure that I don't want to be and have the characteristics and the traits, whether emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, socially, of the same people that fought against the Imam in Karbala. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala Ahl Baytih Tayyibin Tahirin. अब ज़ियारतना
زيارة وارث. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث علي أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. ولعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأسلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. أشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبي بكم موقن بشرع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وعمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأبداء. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدتي نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد على حسن بن علي الولي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك أيها العبد الصالح مطيع لله ولرسوله، وأشهد أنك قد جاهدت ونصحت وصبرت حتى أتاك اليقين. لعن الله الظالمين لكم من الأولين والآخرين وألحقهم بدرجة الجحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام عليك ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيين. السلام عليك ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولى ابن مولى. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك سلطان أبو الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا.